Hello and welcome to another episode of the Jim Powell Report. I'm your host, Jim Powell, and today we have a really interesting show. We have an environmental bounty hunter, actually a pollution bounty hunter, William E. Marks, the famous William E. Marks, author of Water Voices 1 and 2, and we're going to talk about Andrew Wyeth and remembrances of your time with Andrew Wyeth, and it's great to have you on the show here again, William.
Hey, great to be back, Jim. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I remember when we were on the National Public Radio program for
Yes.
cataloging anecdotal stories of life on the vineyard.
Yeah.
That was fun, and you have been out gathering some more stories, and here to share one is poignant because just recently the beloved artist Andrew Wyeth passed on January 16th. And so we want to commemorate Andrew Wyeth, and we have an example here of his autobiography in pictures that we want to talk about, but that you have a wonderful connection with Andrew Wyeth that starts way back in the 70s,
Yes.
back when you were a pollution bounty hunter.
That's right.
In New Jersey. There was an
Yes.
article in the New York Times about this.
Yes, a big article. The
And
New
a
York
photograph of you with some horses.
Times. Yes, a photograph of me with horses in traffic, coming down Broad Street in the city of Newark. I used to be the senior environmental analyst for the city of Newark, handling all their water, public water supply, their water pollution, et cetera, of the confluence of the Hudson and the Passaics. And so when I finished, I left Newark to do the horseback journey, and I went through the city of Newark. I was greeted by the mayor and the head of the DEP for the state, et cetera, on the steps of the city hall that I used to work in. And that photograph of me coming down through all the traffic.
With your hat?
People were yelling out the cars. And again, I was in rush hour traffic with my two horses with no police protection, and the horses handled it beautifully.
Now, why did they call you a bounty hunter?
Well, it's called a pollution bounty hunter because literally I did that for over 4 years. As a student at Fairleigh Dickinson University, I was riding my motorcycle to campus one day and I saw a bunch of dead fish in a river when I was crossing over a bridge. And that led to me investigating the causes of the fish kill. And
this is back in the 70s,
yes,
when the EPA
early
is growing
70s.
in strength. The Clean Water
Yeah.
Act had just been enacted a few years prior. And
It did, and they just created the Environmental Protection Agency in 1970. That was President Nixon by executive order.
so all this momentum's going on.
All this one, and Earth Day.
Yeah, I remember the first one.
Yes.
I was there.
So,
Yeah.
so you're right, a lot of momentum.
Yep.
But no one was doing this type of work of investigating industries. And so it was obvious to me that there was something going on that was wrong politically because the fish kills, the scientists for the local boards and the state kept saying, source of kill unknown, investigation could not be completed due to lack of evidence for cause of fish. And this kept happening. And there was a lot of industry in the area. So that led to me using my water testing abilities that I had honed when I was an undergraduate, and using a camera and going up and down rivers and documenting the sources of the pollution, the illegal sources of pollution. And because I knew everyone was corrupt, at least intuitively.
Intuitively, you had that hunch.
I had the hunch.
But then you started working on the hunch and gathering that evidence.
I gathered it because I went on my own and studied some federal legislation, and there was the old 1899 Refuse Act, and which had a provision in it for citizens to investigate pollution of navigable waterways. And I knocked on the door of the U.S. Attorney's Office in New Jersey, who was Herbert Stern, who had just put the mayor of Newark in jail. It was ad honesio for corruption. And I knocked on Herb Stern's door and said, I'm collecting evidence. And he assigned the U.S. Attorney's department that they had for investigating pollution of water, riverways, navigable riverways, which come under the federal jurisdiction. And I worked with them, and I collected my evidence, and they eventually had industries indicted by federal grand juries based on my evidence. And that's how I got the moniker of Pollution Bounty Hunter.
Pollution Bounty Hunter.
Yes.
And so you're going through Newark, you're on these horses.
Yes.
And your stories are so wonderfully linear, and then they go off into these different tangents. You started bumping into people.
Yes.
Who'd you bump into next?
From Newark? Well, because of serendipity of a person that lived in my hometown named George Hendricks and his wife in my hometown of Towacco. His brother was Eric Sloan, the famous artist for New England. And he said, stop in and see my brother Eric, which I did. Eric and Mimi Sloan had me as guests on their estate in Connecticut.
Beautiful place.
Very beautiful place. And I'm sitting there having breakfast with Eric and Mimi, and they get a phone call, and Eric is leaning back and laughing and talking to this guy named Andy. And then Betsy gets on the phone, and Betsy wants to talk to Mimi, so Mimi's talking with Betsy. And then Eric says, oh, he said, we're having breakfast with this fellow with long whiskers and bushy curly hair who's riding across the United States on horseback, and he's coming by your way on his way up to the Canadian border. And he said, oh, all right, here, I'll put him on. And I'm talking to this guy named Andy, all right? You know, I'm leaning back, and we're joking, and he's asking questions about the horseback journey, which I called Ride for Nature, because it was an environmental documentary. I still have my diaries. And he said, hey, listen, he said, get my phone number from Eric and Mimi. He says, and call me as you get up near Cushing. He says, I have a big farm, sheep farm, and you and your horses would be welcome to stay as my guest. Now, I didn't know I was speaking with Andy Wyeth. I get off the phone, I hand it back to Eric and Mimi, and then after they finished talking, he said, do you know who Andy is, this guy Andy? I said, no. He says, he's Andrew Wyeth. I said, the artist? He goes, yes. I said, oh my God. I said, that's wonderful. And so I did. I hung out with Andy and Betsy and their son Nicholas, and his wife on their farm up in Cushing, Maine.
And you got to see him do some painting?
I got to see him do painting. As you know, Andrew Wyeth, I have a photograph of me standing next to Andy. We went driving around his farm.
His little Jeep?
His little Jeep, his four-wheel drive convertible with his yellow lab in the car. I actually stood next to Andy watching him paint a scene in a field. And the curious thing about Andrew Wyeth is that he would not even let his wife watch him paint. She was not allowed to be in his studio. Rarely would he allow anyone to photograph him in circumstances around the farm or near his studio.
He was very private.
Very private. Rarely would he allow anyone watch him paint. And even more rarely, Jim, would he allow anyone to photograph him painting. And I had the opportunity to be with him and to photograph him as he is painting plein air in a natural setting, painting a scene from his farm overlooking the ocean. And I'm hanging out. Now we're driving around.
He's up in Maine.
Up in Maine on his farm. And we're bouncing around the field. And the dog's in the back, the yellow lab, and we're chatting away. And he would see something that caught his fancy and stop and paint. Philosophizing about life. One thing that, two things that really impressed me philosophically was he brought up the subject of ego. And he said, you know, he said, ego is a very real thing. And I said, what do you mean? He says, well, he said, everyone has an ego. He said, it's a real part of the human experience. He said, even I have an ego. He said, there was a man that really wanted one of my paintings. And he said, well, Andy, you just don't want to give away a painting. He said, no, but this is what happened. He said, this man was collecting art from famous artists, living artists. And he would go and do research on that artist from birth until the present time. And he would put together a beautifully leather-bound book with photographs, news clippings, history about the artist. And he would mail it to the artist as a gift and said, in his letter, when he would mail the letter, he would say, you've impressed me. I wanted to research your life. Please accept this gift. If you feel that you would like to give me something in return, all I request is a small original painting. So Andy sent him a little tiny small original painting. Wow. And he said, William, he said, that man appealed to my ego. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. The second thing that I learned from Andrew Wyeth was relative to being here and after you die. And this is so beautiful to have this philosophy. He's already looking at his death, his forthcoming death, and his legacy. He said, if there's one thing that I want to be remembered for, and he said, I want to be remembered for the way my paintings made people feel, mm-hmm. the way my paintings move people. Mm-hmm. He said, and that is my way of transcending death. Mm-hmm. That was his way of living after he died. A beautiful philosophy, Jim, mm-hmm. and I think it's something that a lot of us should subscribe to.
Mm-hmm. Leaving that and passing it on to the next generation.
And what you leave behind as well, Jim,
mm-hmm.
you know?
Mm-hmm. And something that people will see from different perspectives. Each person looking at a piece of art
yes.
will, like when you look at Christina's World,
yes.
You don't know that the woman's blind. You don't know that no one's around to help her out. You think they're out of the scene, or is she crippled, or is she not? How did she get back to the house? You know, all those different feelings come through. And mm-hmm. Now, Andrew Wyeth went to school at Bates College in Maine, so it's wonderful that he would leave his home in Pennsylvania and go back up to summer in Maine. And just reading a little bit of his background. And so now you're up there visiting,
yes.
and this is just all out of serendipity, because yes. you started a journey as a pollution bounty hunter in California, is that right?
Mm-hmm. San Diego.
In San Diego, California. And you met a lot of people there that just passed along good feelings to you. One of them was Jerry Brown, we were talking earlier.
Governor Jerry Brown, whom I saw just recently when I was out in L.A. at a party, a fundraiser for Oceana, and Sting and Dustin Hoffman were there performing on stage.
So here it is 30 years later.
It's 30 years later.
Approximately 30 years later. And you've taken the 7,000-mile journey with horses.
Called Ride for Nature.
Called Ride for Nature.
For water. Mm-hmm. And here I am at a cocktail party more than 30 years later, mm-hmm. with Sting and Dustin Hoffman and a cast of celebrities again, in the interest of water. Mm-hmm. And Jerry Brown was a staunch environmentalist when he was a governor back in 1976 and 77.
Mm-hmm. He was dating Linda Ronstadt.
And yes.
And Sting stays in Edgartown when he comes.
And here's Jerry Brown mm-hmm. at this party. Mm-hmm. And he and I are chatting away, and I said, do you remember when you were governor in 1976 about this fellow that took a trek across the United States on horseback? And he goes, geez, he said, I really don't remember. I said, you sent me a letter mm-hmm. supporting my horseback trek across the United States, but he didn't remember so much the incident of the inception, but the horseback trek received so much national and international publicity, he remembered the horseback trek.
Oh yeah, you were in the New York Times.
UPI, AP,
Yeah.
national television
Yeah,
many times.
it was
So,
fun. And so you were building awareness, and so you get up to Maine, there's Andrew Wyeth, and I want to get back to his life and the beauty of his paintings and his legacy that he passed on. I wish that we could take a look, and I want people to go to their own local libraries and bookstores and pick up a copy of Andrew Wyeth's autobiography and look at the beautiful paintings that he did. They're so, I want to say, simplistic and natural. They're all, I want to say, landscapes or natural scenes, but with incredible detail and simplicity of seeing a man leaning on a scythe, or someone just like Christina's world out in the field, or the view from the top floor of the house in Maine, looking at where the 18th century homestead that he built, looking out over the pond on the peninsula, and that type of attention to detail.
Yes.
Is the message that probably he was trying to pass on to us, to see if we could see life with the same detail that he does, or that he did.
An excellent point, Jim. And I also liked his painting of his son Jamie called Far Away, where Jamie is sitting with a coon hat in a field.
Yes.
Yeah, I thought it was a great portrait of Jamie as a young boy, and Jamie fantasizing being perhaps Daniel Boone.
Yes.
And his history, N.C. Wyeth, of course, kind of a cowboy-type character in full regalia many times. But relative to the subjectivity of our perceiving and appreciating his artwork, of course, it's an individual resonance with the paintings. But when I was with him, Jim, and he was doing the painting, there is a scene a photograph, I took several there, but when he's concentrating and he's focused and he's painting, and what he's painting is, it was a scene, the field went down and there was a clump of trees, and then there was an opening in the trees and you could see the ocean. And a sailboat was tacking back and forth in the scene and then went into the trees. And Andy is painting, and I didn't say a word the entire time during this, because I knew he was locked in. I wasn't even there in his mind. That was obvious. And he's painting, and he's painting, and he's looking, and he's painting. He goes like this, and then he stands up because his vehicle has a little bumper for his feet to rest on. And that's obvious in the photograph. When you look at the photograph that I have here for this conversation, he would stand up, he took his pad, dropped it on the ground, stood up on the hood of his, stood up on the bumper and looked down at it, turned around, grabbed a paintbrush, and mixed some of the watercolors on the hood of his Jeep, mixing them together wildly, looks back, drops off the bumper onto the ground on his hands and knees, and he's making an addition to the painting.
Wow.
Totally. In fact, when I first met him at the farm, I was sitting in the main house at the dining room table with Betsy, and we're chatting away, and I'm having some tea. And after a while, in walks Andy. Now, he has this wool Nehru type jacket on. And what's sticking out of the jacket is, it has some burrs, cacti burrs, and some pieces of brush. He had obviously been rolling around on the ground somewhere.
To get a perspective.
God knows what he was doing, or if he was laying on his back. I have no clue. But when I first met him, he walked in, he was all rumpled, and had all kinds of stuff clinging to his jacket from just coming out back from some adventure.
Some of the best artists I've seen that remind me of that. Anne McGee, when I see her up in Menemsha, she'll be covered from head to toe with a big hat and whatever is around that she's been laying in so she can get a painting just right. She'll have clay or whatever, sand. And that's so true.
Do you paint?
I don't paint.
Okay.
But I've been out photographing people. I've done a calendar and different things. But it's wonderful to get to know the personality of these people. What else is Andrew Wyeth like? What can you remember about your conversation with him? Was he soft-spoken?
Very soft-spoken.
Sounds like he's very introspective, obviously.
Very
talking about ego.
Very introspective. And you know, it was only because of his recent death that I shared those photographs with other people. And one of the conversations we had, because I knew that he was reclusive, I knew that he was very private and he cherished his privacy, and that was very vital to him for the muse to flow and for him to create. He needed that space between him and the rest of the world, his own bubble that he lived in as an artist, and he was very particular as to who entered that bubble. I felt so honored to be there that I had to ask this question. After I took the photographs, and just when we were pulling up in the Jeep, I said, "May I photograph you while you're painting?" And he said, "Yes." So we're driving back to the main house, and he's kind of humming to himself, and I said, "Andy, can I ask you this question?" And he goes, "Ask me any question." I said, "I feel really honored that you and your family have given me this access." I said, "But can I ask you why you allow me to photograph you as you're painting and photograph myself standing next to you as you're painting?" I said, "I know this is something that you rarely allow anyone to do." And he goes, "Well," he said, "William," he said, "to be honest with you," he said, "I can tell that I can trust you." He said, "And I know that you will never use those photographs in any way that would hurt me or my family." Looking me right in the eyes. And I felt chills going up and down my body that was coming from Andrew Wyeth, but that also, the honor, but also that in his filtering process, that from our first meeting, when he first walked in the door, that I had somehow or other worked my way through his filters to where he dropped his guard down and was himself. And
you get to see him in his creative prowess.
In his creative prowess, being himself, and being free to be himself, and know that I would not be judgmental, and that I too was being myself. I was so extremely grounded at that time from the horseback journey. And I kind of feel that he picked up on that as well. And it's another thing that he finished when I was there. He finished a painting of a young man with a beard, with a cap on, inside a house, a lighthouse that was brick-lined, looking out a window with mullions, and you could see the ocean, just a hint of the ocean in the distance. Now, he finished that painting while I was there. It's a blonde-haired guy.
A young guy.
Young guy, with beard just like mine, looking out to sea from the inside of a lighthouse. And it was almost as though he could see the future, if in fact that is me, or the coincidence, or the synergy of the moment, whatever may have been the confluence at that time. But here it is 30 years later, I'm standing inside the Gay Head lighthouse that I saved from being torn down in the mid-1980s.
Yes.
Looking out that window on the second floor.
I know what you're talking about.
Brick lined, mullions, looking out towards sea. And almost as though there was something forecasting in the future, the prescience of that moment was very profound. And I felt that.
Do you think that Andrew Wyeth,
Yes.
when he put his brush to canvas, made an image, he made an actual portal, and that he could view his life through the people that were looking into that image that he had just painted, and that when he saw you come, that you had been coming on a journey, and that you were just off the next canvas, just out of range, but that whatever else he was painting, there was that blonde boy that was looking at the lighthouse, that he felt and could communicate, you know, that. And that's why you felt to him that you were worthy to come into his world, into his canvas, to be one of his subjects, maybe for a future painting or something.
Well, that's an excellent and a transcending thought. And on that note, to segue, Jim, when he was doing the painting in the field of the ocean scene, remember I was talking about the sailboat that was tacking back and forth, and the sailboat disappeared.
Yeah, where'd it go?
Okay, now he finishes the painting, and I'm standing there next to him, and he's on the hood of his Jeep, and I was saying, geez, Andy, I thought for sure the sailboat would be in the scene. I said,
That's right, people always love to put boats.
Boats. I said, I'm surprised you didn't put that, the sailboat in the scene. He goes, oh, the sailboat's in there. I go, it is? He goes, yeah. He says, take a look. So I was looking, I was thinking maybe there'd be a hint of the stern in the trees, or the mast, or maybe the top of the mast. There'd be something in the trees, and I'm looking, I can't see the sailboat, Jim. So I said, Andy, I said, I cannot see the sailboat. And he said, well, it's there. He said, you see this little undulating line here?
In the water.
In the water.
The tack line.
He goes, but it wasn't obvious. It was very subtle.
He was so subtle.
And he said, to be honest with you, he said, most people who look at this painting will not know that that came from the wake of a sailboat. He said, but other people will see those white lines and they'll wonder why they're there. He said, and the only person who really knows, he said, besides you and me right now, he said, is just us as to what those white pieces of oil are in the painting.
Yes.
So you're right, in a way, he was looking into the future, Jim, as to how people would look at his painting, how it would resonate with them, and what they would be thinking. So you were very astute to pick that up. Did you read that somewhere?
No.
That was an observation of your own, extremely intuitive of you, because that is precisely where the man's mind was.
Wow.
And the fact that he anticipated people looking at his paintings and that giving him immortality was very important in his mind as well, Jim.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah.
William, I wish we could talk longer as we're
Thank you.
commemorating the life of Andrew Wyeth.
Yes.
And your connection to him on your starting out on your journey, and but we want to commemorate the life and celebrate that. The passing of Andrew Wyeth, famous American artist. He died on January 16th, 2009 at the age of 91. And we want to thank you for being on our show today, William. Again,
my pleasure,
great
Jim.
to see you. There'll be other things
Good
we'll
to
talk
see
about
you.
in the future.
Yes, thank you.
And I want to thank you, our viewers, for watching today. And thanks to our sponsors. Thanks to Humphrey's Bakery for helping support us here. And I want to thank you for watching. And please give me a call, 696-1959. That's 508-696-1959. And let me know what you think of the show. Maybe you can be on the show sometime yourself. Anyways, thank you very much. We'll see you again soon.